meeting is being recorded.
This is where we all click leave meeting.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So welcome everyone. Welcome to the first instalment of the Punk Scholars 9th annual conference and postgraduate symposium in the UK. This is the UK kind of branch doing it, and I want to kind of just make it clear that this is the first of a couple of events that and you can find it, Punk and Resilience, on the Punk Scholars Network website page, and there are events where we're interviewing G tomorrow, for instance, G Voucher from Crass. I have got a little script here. So firstly, I'd like to thank a few folk. Obviously, I'd like to thank Dick and Ian for agreeing to do this.
Oh yeah,
absolutely pleased as punch to have you both here. So thank you very much. I would like to thank the incredible Joe Public for designing the poster, JP23 for designing the poster. I've always wanted a poster designed for one of my events by Joe, so thank you very much, mate. I'd like to thank Middlesex University for hosting the event, and thanking them, specifically the music department, for supporting my research. The structure of the event really will be first perhaps 3/4 of an hour or something. We see how it goes. Just really kind of sharing a discussion between Dick and Ian about the new book, which is Silence Has No Reaction, 40 Years of the Subhumans. And then what we'll do is we'll open it up to you guys to ask questions. I thought that you couldn't unmute yourself. I thought I'd sorted Zoom out, and I wanted to let you know that that's not anything to do with me or the PSN censoring anyone. It's because in the past we've done this, and then people have popped off and put the cup of tea on, the kettle on to make a cup of tea, and so you've got a kettle going on in the background. Or if you live around my house, you've got dogs barking. So that was really just the smooth running of the event. So let's start. Again, thanks you guys for coming along. Really, I know we met like last week just to very briefly discuss what we were going to talk about. And Ian, you're known for writing these books about for a specific time frame or specific geographies. I'm thinking about like Burning Britain or like Trapped in a Scene, those kind of books where you take a certain geography. Even Day the Country Died. Say this is London, this is the Southwest, etc., etc. So what made you want to write a biography of the Subhumans?
That's a good question. I mean, I started with Burning Britain, as you said, so I started with sort of 1980 as the line in the sand, which is when I got into punk, and worked my way through up to date. And then I did literally think, what am I going to do now? I've been toying with the idea of maybe writing a book about just one band, and I've been approached several times over the years. Someone said, would you be interested in writing a book about the Dead Kennedys? Somebody asked me if I wanted to write a book about the Great Rock and Roll Swindle film, but I'm a sort of firm believer in writing about what you know really well and thoroughly. So I wanted to write about a band that meant a lot to me, that I'd seen many times over the years in all their different periods. So the Subhumans, it came to my mind probably a few years ago. There's very few bands I would want to write one whole book about. Maybe Crass, but people have done it already. Maybe Rudimentary Peni, but I think that'll be like pulling teeth, probably trying to fill a book on that band. So yes, Subhumans, I really wanted to do it. I guess the only reason I didn't reach out to them and ask them was because I just thought, well, Dick's obviously going to write it himself at some point, so yeah. why would they trust me to do it? But yeah, after the last book, I put that to bed, and I was in a bit of a slump then. What am I going to do next? And I just sent Dick a tentative email to see how the land lay, and yeah, he said yes, and off we went.
I'd like to quote something from the book on anarcho-punk that you've specifically done, The Day the Country Died, and I don't even know where you got the title from. I'm sure, it's a great title though. It's great, and you say of all the anarcho-punk bands featured in the book, the Subhumans are by the most consistent, having never released a bad record or rarely played a bad gig. And then there are 14 pages, Go on.
Yeah, no, I stand by that. I've often said that pound for pound, they're the best UK band. I generally haven't seen them play a bad gig, and they haven't done a bad record. There's one or two bad songs maybe, but they've not done a bad record. So I still stand by that statement.
And so there you are. You've you want to write a biography of the Subhumans. How did your approach differ to your approach to something like Burning Britain or Day the Country Died?
I definitely wanted to do it all face to face, like all the interviews face to face. So I really tried to avoid phone interviews and email interviews and stuff like that, which I had relied on quite heavily for some of the other books where there were like 150 bands or something, and the Subhumans aren't that far away from me geographically. Well, Dick and Bruce aren't anyway, Trotsky is. So Trotsky's interviews were done over Zoom or Teams or something like that. I can't remember which, but the rest of the interviews are face to face, and they just went, where it differed from the other bands is I just went deeper, really. I just had more time, to get into the detail. When you've only got 15 pages on a band in The Day the Country Died, you do have to give everything a light touch, as it were, and I don't think we gave anything a light touch this time. I imagine the band were sick of the sight of me by the time we finished researching it.
And for you, Dick, did you how did the interviews go? Have you got I know that Joe Public told me actually that about your extensive list of gigs that
yes.
So you've got a list of every single gig, haven't you, with approximate numbers and songs played?
All the exact numbers of the songs played, approximate numbers of the people who turned up at each show. Yeah, it's the total geek inside me. It's one of my last hardcore geekiness things, is like writing down all the gigs, who the support bands were, what songs we played, then later on adding up the songs and see how many songs we played most, all sorts of statistics like that. And this book is finally the reason why it was being done, apart from me being a geek. The other reason, the sublime unknown reason turned out when he was doing his book, but all the gigs in the back in a list. So other geeky punk rockers would go, oh yeah, I was at that one. Oh, if that was earlier than I thought it was. Oh, I didn't remember playing that gig. All that sort of thing. It finally became useful. Like noting things down, because as I'm discovering lately, especially during this book and research, I got 296 diaries since 1979. So everything I've done should, in theory, be written down. So there's referring to that, had all these gigs listed. So the information source was, in theory, at least all there, although I didn't actually look back at many of them. The interviews were good because we known Ian for a long time anyway. We know his books, his style, and his seriousness and his ability to write. And it just a string of quite natural chats about what had happened, done in sort of like a time order from when it all started, or before it all started, in our previous bands, Stupid Humans and The Mental, Organised Chaos, all these different bits of local history. And just went on a timeline all the way up till, start of this year, really. So it's about a year and a bit, I think, of irregular interviews. And Ian was getting in touch with people we haven't seen or wouldn't know how to get hold of. for like years. Like he found Patrick, the guy who drove the Subhumans around on the first ever USA tour, and he was there as like somebody who knew exactly what he was doing. And we were just like first time over there, not knowing anything we were doing. And it's all, he found Nick Lant, who did the Daily Guide cover and the Rats cover and the Evolution cover. And we hadn't heard of him for decades. He just sort of vanished. You know, wrote him another letter. Did he feel like doing a cover for, what was it going to be? Split Vision, I think. We were desperate for a good cover. And he never wrote back, and nobody knew where he went. And Ian found him anyway. So there you go. So he's a very good researcher. He was getting a lot of background thoughts from people about what they think we're like, which is very interesting to read, because most people wouldn't dare say that sort of stuff to your face. I mean, it's not bad. I mean, actually, most of it is very good. But you don't go complimenting your mates to their face, because it just seems a bit weird thing to do. We've got band members complimenting each other only in the book, only because Ian's asking. Because you put a third person in charge of a conversation between old friends, and they can mediate answers from those friends that they wouldn't just give you to your face, because it would just seem weird or out of place or just gushy. You know what I mean? So Ian was an ideal person to do it. And as for him thinking, well, Dick's probably going to write this book anyway, I said, nah. See, I wouldn't know where to start. It would all be biased. I'd feel I was showing off half the time, feel I was underplaying stuff half the time. Then there's a forgetfulness. But when you've got me talking, and Bruce and Phil and Trotsky and Nick Lant and so on and so on from all over the place and all throughout the timeline, you've got a really good mixed picture of what, not just what we or just Ian thinks we're like, but what other people think of us as well as memories of gigs and the state of the scene back in the 80s and things that were going on, tribal stuff, violence, way too much drinking. So there's a good portion of real life amongst all the, this tour came next and this gig was next, and you know, what was that gig like? Can't remember. What was that one like? Totally remember. It's a right mixture.
That's great. So it does actually go right back to the Mentals then, when right back to the beginning of your musical. What was it like, kind of? I mean, you say you've got all these kind of these diaries. So these diaries aren't just about like what gig you were playing at. It was more than that. It was probably you talking about, you know, the miners' strike, the Falklands War, you know, Thatcher's Britain in the 1980s, contextualizing all your ideas within a cultural backdrop. And what was it like, kind of going back there and revisiting that again?
Well, that's a two-part answer. Firstly, there's hardly any political discourse in my diaries about what I thought of Thatcher or the miners' strike, or Blair or Bush or anything like that. There might be a note, oh, by the way, this is going on. There's a war over here. But diaries are for what I think about stuff. And what I think about war and stuff like that, it's just like, that's for songs or conversation. The diary is just for the non-songs and the non-conversation that goes on, all the stuff in your head. Just get it down. There's a load of rubbish. There's vague descriptions of gigs. There's some things, and you'd think, wouldn't you? You write it down. Yeah, this will be a reminder for later on. When you read your diary back about a gig or something, and you read it, and you wrote it years ago, and you read it, and you still can't remember it, it's like someone else wrote it. And it's like, well, that's weird. Couldn't you put more detail in to remind me of where I put the hat? It drive you nuts, but so with everything else. But no, the second part of that, what was the second part of that?
And what was it like revisiting that?
Oh yeah. It was oddly refreshing, and it brought back a lot of good memories and reminded me of people I'd completely forgotten about. And the very nature of life back in the 80s, being a band member, it was just fairly crazy. A lot of things happened more or less instantly. Some gigs were booked like 3 days before we play them. There was one diary entry I read in just like fascinating detail, just wondering how on earth we got away with getting anywhere at all, because none of us could drive. We had to go find one of about 4 or 5 old mates of Bruce's mum and ask them to do it again for like somewhere between nothing and 25 quid for spending hours and hours and hours driving us around the country, just up to Leeds for one gig and then back again. Completely knackering work. But someone was always up for it. I woke up one morning after a party in Trowbridge. Somebody came in and woke me up, returning my jacket, which he'd come in and stolen off me the night before, he said, to disguise himself, he said, as he was running away from the cops. So I got my jacket back, wondering what all that was about. Then with a hangover, went round all the available drivers on foot in Trowbridge. And that was quite a lot hefty walk. Took a couple of hours before I found someone who could do it. No, you can't just ring them up. You know, no mobile phones, none of that rubbish. You've got to do the walk-in and do the asking. Then we found someone who could do it. Then we had to ring round and find a hire van that was available at very short notice, like now. Eventually found one of them. Then found someone to give us all a lift out to the van hire place. Then drive over to Warminster and load up the gear and get the rest of the van. And then get to the gig in London, 100 miles away, 3 hours late. But apparently it didn't matter. I thought, wow, was this like a typical run around in a mad panic on the same day as the gig event? It wasn't. But it wasn't that rare that things were just organized. Everything's just much faster. I mean, you're younger, you've got more energy. Everything's more or less new, you know, and it just injects a lot of energy. And it's, you know, all over the place. It's brilliant.
Yeah,
not all of it's brilliant. There was some bad stuff, but not a lot.
There's a really good photo of you in Day the Country Died, a very, very young Dick Lucas. Very young.
Well, we all were once.
And so Ian, to just go back to that approach then. So there you were after Burning Britain and those kinds of books, which is more of an encyclopedic overview, and then deciding to do a book on the Subhumans, and then approaching Dick, and Dick's got all these kind of archives and these journals. How did you start piecing it together?
I think
it's a difficult one, isn't it? Yeah.
I think the very first question I asked Dick was, when were you born? And he's like, oh, we're going that far back, are we? I wanted to get his age, really. But no, they were just, like Dick said, they were quite informal conversations. I know from transcribing interviews that it's easier to edit them if they follow some rough chronological order. And that was the challenge, really. You know, I got all these interviews. I mean, Dick talks quite quickly, and to transcribe like a 3-hour interview with Dick, it was a lot of words, you know, and then threading them, you know, through with what Bruce said and what the guys from the A-Head said and things like that. That was the challenge, really, just bringing the relevant bits to the table at the right time. But the beauty of having Dick's diaries, I think, was with all the other books, we would sometimes come to a bit of an impasse with like band members disputing what happened and when. And we could actually, I would often email Dick and say, look, you know, can you look this up in the diary and confirm it for me? And, you know, like Dick said, sometimes he couldn't even remember it, but he said it's in the diary. It must have happened, else I wouldn't have written it down. So, you know, they were really, really useful to refer to. But yeah, it was just a case of just getting as much material as possible. And then there was a hefty edit. I mean, it's a big book anyway. It's over 600 pages. I mean, it could have been twice as big probably. So it was really a case of editing it down so you captured all the sort of key moments and put enough flavor in. You know, I wanted to capture the band's personalities. I wanted to capture what actually happened to the band, you know, the sort of the biographical stuff, but also what was going on around them as well. You know, the Wiltshire scene, the wider UK scene, the anarcho scene, where the Subhumans overlapped with it, really. So I didn't sort of rant on and on about politics, but for example, you know, there's pictures from Stop the City in there because that was relevant via the song Rats, and that was how it was discussed and everything like that. And, you know, Stonehenge, the festival's there because the Subhumans played there. So, you know, it's about the band, but it's about a bigger thing as well. But yeah, the approach was very, I guess, organic is the only way to describe it. It wasn't particularly planned out. It's only as you pull it together at the end where you think, right, actually, you know, I've got to get it within this word count, you know, and we've got to get it over the line by this date and things like that. That's when it starts to sort of become a little bit more structured. But to start with, I was just having a whale of a time, really.
Because, like, there's a few. The whole point of the punk scholars really is that, for some of us who are so-called academics, because that's what they call us, when we write academically about punk, I think it's, for me, that would be easier than writing a biography. For me, it's kind of clear in my head. Look, this is the introduction. Then I'm going to write about this, and then I'm going to write about that, and I'm going to bring this theory in here. And so I've got a kind of a set structure. Did the book kind of write itself in the end, or did you have a kind of structure in your head going, right, chapter 1's going to be this, chapter 2 is going to be this, etc.?
Well, there were different ways I could have done it. I mean, I did think we could have had chapters on, I don't know, different themes or different albums or something like that. And I guess it was a cop-out in the end, but chapter 1 is 1979, chapter 2 is 1980, and so on. Certainly up until about 85 or 86, where the band were going at like 100 miles an hour and very prolific, and a lot went on in those years. And then after they reformed, I started to group the years together into sort of groups of 3 or 4 years, because there were common themes in those years, lots of American tours and just like one new record and stuff. But for the early days, in amongst all this sort of youthful excitement and creativity and stuff like that, they were churning out EPs every 3 or 4 months and rattling off, all these gigs in between and stuff like that. So those years merited a chapter each, and they're big chapters. But once I decided that was the way I was going to do it, it just became a little bit easier then, because I had a framework to hang it on. It made sense of, these hundreds of flyers and photos and everything like that.
So Dick, did you have any kind of say in the structure? And something I really want to get onto as well, talk to me about is you're here, and you're obviously you're the vocalist of the Subhumans, but of course there is Trotsky, there is Phil, there are these other guys that are behind the scenes that are in the band. But did you guys kind of talk to Ian about the structure at all?
Well, actually, the time-based structure did seem just the most straightforward and sensible, because otherwise, if you start hanging things on, as Ian said, the record releases or the politics versus the humor or whatever, then things will just, within those things, they'll probably all hang themselves on the timeline anyway. So you might as well mix all the things up, hang them on the timeline, then nothing's going to get dull. I'm fed up with reading about studios for like a whole 50 pages, but you read about studios every 32 pages for 1 page each, then it's not boring to read about studios, as a weird example. So it gets, the variety comes out of things that are happening. And if you just leap from 1980 to 2000 and say, read those 2 chapters, you can see, wow, this was happening then. Total like chaos and newness. And over it is like sort of a developed band who is still going, but nothing's quite so chaotic anymore. You can do that comparison. I think a timeline way of doing it is just really obvious, really, and essential.
Yeah. I suppose an answer, I suppose for Ian really is, how did you, so you approached Trotsky and Phil and Bruce and the others, and how did you find their voice? Just as an example, for instance, I didn't know, but Trotsky is not a great fan of giving interviews. Is that right?
Yeah, apparently he grants them very rarely. I mean, he was a brilliant interviewee. I mean, he laughs a lot. He's really honest and and open and everything. So he is a perfect interviewee. Like, yeah, he laughed a lot, and he made me laugh a lot as well. And that was, it was a really enjoyable interview to do. I mean, Phil, I'm a bassist myself, and Grant and Phil were both a huge influence on me. So, I was really looking forward to talking to those guys, and I was trying not to be too much of a fanboy and stuff, but, wanted to talk about their gear and, you know, scales and stuff like that. But I didn't put any of that sort of really nerdy bass sort of stuff in the book too much. But so, you know, there was a good engagement and link there really for me. And then, yeah, I mean, I guess after Dick, who I did the most interviews with, and that seemed natural because he wrote so many of the lyrics as well. And there's a lot of talk about the meaning behind the songs and things like that as well in the book. I don't think you could do a book on the Subhumans without talking about that side of it in great depth. But, you know, musically as well, I always thought the Subhumans were like really clever, really advanced and progressive compared to a lot of the other bands at the time, you know, and a lot of that does come from Bruce and his eclectic influences and things like that as well. So that was really fascinating for me, you know, to try and understand the sort of musical influences behind some of the songs. So, you know, each band member brought a different flavor to the table, and, you know, and I tried to cram it all in the book really. So it isn't just you know, a monologue from Dick or anything like that. It's chops and changes between the different band members, an awful lot, and then other people that were around the band as well.
Because it's funny, you know, because Russ Bestley, who's sitting next to me, turned up in London about half an hour ago, and we were sorting out the T-shirts for the Punk Scholars event and all that. And we were talking about how the Subhumans kind of, they're obviously often seen as an anarcho-punk band. But in The Day the Country Died, and I've read other places, Dick, that, you know, that you don't really like that kind of stereotypical, that kind of pigeonholing of your band like that. And you had kind of not issues, but, you know, concerns that, you know, saying, well, we're not an anarcho-punk band. What is an anarcho-punk band? You know?
Yeah. Yeah, I never like labels for bands anyway. They're okay if you're lazy, you want a sort of relative guideline to what they might sound like. But anarcho-punk, I'm happy to be in an anarcho-punk band. And that does seem a fairly accurate summation of what we're about, I guess. But we're not really, none of us, I think, would describe ourselves as anarchists without surrounding that statement with a really long conversation about what anarchy actually is and what actually it is not. And because once you put a label on things, especially anarcho ones, then people got a lot of questions. Do you believe in this? Do you believe in that? Are you a hypocrite because of this or this or this or this that you do? You drive a car, da, 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 da. You don't do this, you should do that. And it's just like, whoa. I don't want any of these rules. So I'm anarchic as much as I don't want to be told what to be or not to be if I'm an anarchist, okay? So that's what I'm saying. I'm not an anarchist. I'm just not an ist. So it's all ists can leave the building. Also, some of our songs are completely nothing to do with politics, also even seriousness. Drugs of Youth, Peroxide, Till the Pigs Come Round, and several others. I mean, they are old songs, and there haven't been many so-called silly songs in the last 20 years or whatever. But there is a necessity to have fun with punk rock as well as be dead serious about stuff, because being dead serious is a very good place to vent feelings, and it's not just poetry or somebody ranting on the street corner. It's actually set to really wicked music. So that's the way to make good space of lyrical freedom. The lyrical space you've got in a song, use it wisely, because you might not get another chance. At the same time, if you feel very silly and you want to write something daft, then just sing that as well, just for the fun of singing it and having people something to sing along to, because people like to enjoy themselves as well as take something home and feel there's something to think about. And why not mix it up? Bands who waste their time singing about stuff that doesn't advance anybody's thought waves one iota, especially not positively at least. Well, they're up there doing it. I'd rather be doing a bit more with the space for lyrics and music myself.
And is this something you kind of talk about in the book, Ian? These are these kind of topics that you're getting more under the skin about?
Yeah. So, well, both the the serious lyrics and the non-serious lyrics, and also the sense of humor, because when you put 4 teenagers in a van together for any length of time, there's inevitably in jokes and running gags and stuff like that to keep everybody sane when the van breaks down and God knows what. So I mean, a lot of that does come out in the book, and some of the band were keen to have that side of them sort of documented as well. But yeah, there's lots of talk around that, I think, and I think the general consensus was that the Subhumans are a punk band, and then however other people see them, I mean, I guess I'm kind of guilty of propagating some of that sort of stereotypes in a way, because for the first 2 books I loosely split the punk scene, only because it was too big to fit into one book. I was like, right, I'm gonna have to split this in half, and it just made sense to put the peace punks in one book and the chaos punks in another, for want of a better word. Or however you want to split it up, but you had the Exploited and GBH and all that on one side, and then Conflict, Crass and Flux and Subhumans, and there were some awkward bands in the middle, like I don't know, Amoebics, which book do you put them in? Discharge, which book do you put them in? But it was just for convenience, really, because I couldn't fit it all into one book. But yeah, you could argue that the sort of stereotyping that maybe started with someone like Gary Bushell in Sounds or something, when he drew up the the sort of, I was going to say battle lines, but dividing lines between Special Duties and Crass, or Conflict and the Exploited, and then those bands started taking pot shots at each other as well, which kind of fed into it as well. But I've always liked the whole lot. That's why I wrote both books, so I definitely straddled that fence, but personally, I'd always lent towards the more anarcho punk bands, because they sort of reflected, my sort of thought processes and lifestyle choices more.
I mean, just changing subject completely, I just got in my, I was looking back over the books, and I thought it was a really brave thing for you to put AYS in there.
Yeah, well, I didn't want to. I didn't want to just paint the anarcho punk scene up as this sort of virtuous sort of place where everybody made the right decisions all of the time, really. I mean, I bought the AYS material when it came out and loved it, and then later heard the sort of some of the associations John had, and was horrified. But I, if anything, it makes it more interesting for me to talk to John, and that was one of the more interesting interviews, and and then the worry, probably one of the worrying things that made me sort of sit back was like, actually, I've got more in common with this guy than not. We're both proud fathers, and both love our pets, and we both like hardcore music, and we both love the Bad Brains and this, that and the other, but he's horribly right wing and I'm far more left wing, and and that was the sort of one point we had to agree to differ on. And but I thought it was an important interview to put in there, and and it's definitely the one that people talk about the most.
I mean, the one thing I will give John is the longevity of his beliefs. He says in the book, doesn't he? I am still racist. He said, and I still believe in those ideals, and just really in a bad way of linking that to what we're talking about here. Dick, there's been a huge research, I suppose. Could I call it a huge research of kind of anarcho punk? And it was only a couple of months ago that I was with my good lady wife at the Grow Your Own festival in London, seeing Anthrax and Active Slaughter. I know Marnie and Andy are here, obviously, with Alternative, and what they're doing up in Newcastle, North East, is absolutely fantastic. We've got Armoured Flu Unit, of course, down in Southampton. Why do you think? I mean, and you go to Rebellion, and we could see 3 of your bands playing. Dick, what is it? Do you think that has kept this stuff so sort of valid? I suppose.
Well, you could say the validity of anarcho-punk relies on the system still being in its existence as it is, so to speak. Without the exploitation and the deprivation, the poverty, the racism, the sexism, the bullshit, the lies, the rich versus the poor, without all these structural anomalies going on, there's no reason to get pissed off about anything. But, of course, they carry on. So anarcho-punk is the label slapped on a lot of bands who think about it and write songs about it and get angry about it. And that's going to carry on for near as ever as it takes to change it, for anything to change.
Yeah. I think the only thing I did see at the Grow Your Own festival was a lot of us sitting down more after standing up due to having bad backs and having to read menus and stuff with glasses. And so, yeah, we're all getting a little bit older. It's incredible to see the longevity of this scene. It keeps on kind of coming back and coming back.
Well, it's obviously their kids and their friends are all feeding into the same ideals. That's going to help a lot. There's all very well a bunch of over 50-year-olds banging on about the same stuff as 40 years ago. Fair dues. Why not? I'm glad that it does still keep happening, but without involving people younger than us, that's going to fade away with the tide,
Yeah, in fact, we went to a discharge gig a couple of weeks ago in Southampton, and there were plenty of young kids there. We're talking about 14, 15-year-olds, and it was great. It was just
excellent.
Just great seeing these guys. We've been talking for about 40 minutes. Without kind of putting anyone on the spot, Marnie is putting the lyrics for most of the songs are still so relevant today. I don't know if that's Marnie and Andy or both. So would you like to comment on that?
Well, similar to the last answer, really, relevancy depends on the state of society that we're living in.
Yeah.
I've always avoided naming politicians or, in fact, anybody at all in lyrics. Like, I didn't write about Thatcher. I wrote about politicians and politics and power and suffering or whatever. But if you name names, the song's going to be partially dead by the time those people move on to die or go away, or whatever politicians do. So I guess they retained a bit of relevancy because I intended them to be general statements about the nature of power and hierarchies and so on. There again, anything that's kept alive by performance, like if I keep singing the songs or keep publishing the book that's got the poetry in it or whatever, but any statement, once it's out there and continues to be refreshed and people know it's there, this goes all the way back to anybody who scraped poems on a rock with a bit of stone,
Yeah.
The relevancy of something is often just, it's still around, therefore it's still relevant. And I think the fact it's still there is what keeps it relevant. There's plenty of brilliant lyrics that were written back in the 80s, for instance, that aside of a few hundred people who've got their lyric sheet, if they found it ever, nobody knows it was written. I mean, it's all pretty obvious, really. But yeah, there's a lot of good things get written. Relevancy is largely to do with longevity.
I think that's what I think for me personally about the lyrics that you've written, and since I was a school kid listening to them and listening to them in the car coming up here, is that fact that you don't name politicians, and they're very very personal. And yeah, you talk in Power Games, for instance, you talk about a sea of non-conformity. Everyone looking the same, everyone being non-conformist. We're all looking the same here.
Yeah.
Also, it was only until reading Ian's book that and you talking about your anxiety you had, especially going to school, and I could then see through your songs that you were trying to fit in as well, and you were trying to kind of um, understand what was going in your head, because you weren't, as Dickie Dredd has said, you weren't just sitting semi-stable in front of a TV. You were thinking about this stuff, and you were kind of expressing it through political language. And so I find that a lot of your songs are kind of a personal journey as well.
Well, yeah, I guess they were. It just reminds me that the very nature of politics is not all about people at number 10 or in the White House. It's about the way we all get on with each other or don't get on with each other, about hierarchies of power, about male dominance, white male dominance over the planet in terms of money distribution, that sort of thing. It's a lot down to how we react when we're placed in a room full of strangers with each other, and who wants to become dominant and why, and who's looking at you straight in the eye, who's staring at the floor, who's looking at the ceiling, who doesn't know they're even there, who fell asleep on the queue. Also, people are so different from each other. And I love the idea of like everything out there is a result of everything in that circle of random people being what they're like, because human emotions and behavior patterns, and then the result of those behavior patterns is all one big massive jigsaw, and the bits that go in first is just all these different people and all the I'm going off on this jigsaw analogy, I don't know where it's going, but yeah, it is personal, because obviously you don't know what anybody else is thinking, so you just write from the thoughts in your head. If you get confused about stuff, then write it down. If you notice something happening that used to be a bad thing outside the punk scene, you notice that same thing happening now in the punk scene, you think, well, what's this about? We're supposed to be representing freedom and unity and individuality at the same time. It was a bit tricky, but whatever. But all get on, but don't be slacking X, Y, Z off because they don't look punk rock enough. That sort of thing would bug me a lot. And because the odd thing about punk rock, or not that odd, is like a lot of punks dressed. I dressed up weirdly in whatever stupid, silly clothes and badges and pins and all that, because like a lot of other punk rockers, I just wanted to look different and sort of declare it outwardly without having to say it, that I was not the same as all this weird people around me. I want to be myself, and boom, I'm like that. So at the beginning of punk rock, everyone was just wearing all sorts of stuff, or nothing at all, or just some tatty jumper. As long as it wasn't a suit and tie, it didn't matter. You didn't have to have your hair spiked up or dyed, none of that. And it was all about individuality, and not being part of everything else was a lot of that individuality. A lot of people got together because of that, obviously. But when those same people start dividing people, like, oh, you're not punk enough because you ain't got enough studs or whatever, then it all got a bit pitiful, really. And you just got to shake things around from the inside now and again. Otherwise, we will become the same as everything we're fighting against.
Yeah. There's a couple of questions in the chat. These are all for Dick. Has anybody got any questions for Ian? Specific questions, because I'm trying to sell Ian's book here. I don't know whether it's going to be a big seller or not, and we're a little bit concerned. And of course it will. As I said, Dick, can you tell us a little bit more about your own inspirations, music, art, the kind of literature you read, etc.? You're actually on Instagram, aren't you? You've got your Dick Lucas art account on Insta.
Oh, painting, yes. Yeah, painting was that hobby I didn't know I was going to do until about mid-90s or something. We were on tour with Citizen Fish in Poland. We were just about to leave with a whole bag full of zlotys, pre-Euro zlotys. There's like 20,000 to £1 or something. It's daft. You swap a sack full of money for a bag of chips. And we had to get rid of these lotties when we went back into Germany because they were useless everywhere else. So I bought these paints and pastel paints, some brushes, took it back home, got a bit of blank paper and started painting stuff, and sort of took off from there. Really. I never thought I would be any good at doing that sort of thing. So, yeah, I like painting. It does you good. It frees you up from the rest of the world for an hour or two, as long as you want to take on it, as long as you've got the free time or whatever. Just make the free time. You have to. And best thing to do, all you budding artists out there, go into charity shops, and sometimes they got things like this. This is like an enormous bit of canvas. I didn't paint this. This is like a print of some flowers. I mean, it's massive, right? That cost £4. That in a shop, like brand new, would cost you about, I don't know, 80 quid, like enormous. So you just paint it over in white and then just work out where the hell you're going to put it. Still bargain, yeah. Paint over it, give it to someone for Christmas, cheap gifts.
And
see, any budding artist already knows this. I don't know who I'm talking to, really. But you did ask.
I hope Tim Carson knows about this type of stuff, as he's an art lecturer at Middlesex University. But I think he does, hopefully. What about literature? Because I interviewed you years ago, and I, like Ian was saying a bit about being a bit of a fanboy. I'm a bit of a fanboy as well, and I was kind of like, oh my god, I'm going around Dick's house. And one of the first questions for me was, what anarchist writers are you? What are your favourite anarchist writers? And I wanted to ask you about this. And you said, I haven't read any. I got halfway through a page of anarchist writing, found it a bit boring, and put the book down. And it completely blew away my interview. I thought, oh my god.
Sorry about that.
So what kind of literature do you read? What sort of inspiration? Where do you get your poetic nature from?
Not from reading books.
Yeah.
Books. Reading the book, like doing a painting, it is like a luxury thing that I have to fight to make time for. I've got about 10 different books on the go at the moment. One's an overview of how the world thinks. It's called How the World Thinks, about different cultures and the way they treat each other and that sort of thing. The Japanese are very interesting. None of them put themselves above anybody else. They truly actually all work together to create something that needs to be done, which is amazing. The Western world is just full of individualism, which is a lot of selfish people out for themselves. It's just all climbing the structured, greasy poles and ladders in life. And the Japanese have got much more flat, layered, almost Zen-like approach to sharing and responsibility. That's one book I'm reading. So I read something like that. I remember it enough to sum it up for you, which means it must have got in there somehow. And from doing that sort of thing, maybe a song or some part of an idea for a song will pop out later on. Who knows? Books are good, possibly for inspiration. They're good just to keep the brain involved in another sphere that isn't the planet so much. So a good fictional book now and again. Mostly, though, I read more factual books and books about numbers and language. I've got loads of them, full of interesting things about numbers and that. None of which I remember right now, except 496 is a perfect number. All the numbers that multiply to become factors of 496 add up to 496. There you go.
Look at that.
It's good for, no, it's not. It's okay for conversation. when everybody walks away, you can oh yeah, better get another book.
I've got a question for Ian here. It's quite a good one from Dickie Dredd saying, what was the hardest part of the writing?
Physically, it would have been the transcribing, because I'm terrible at typing. That's a challenge. But I guess mentally, it's the edit and trying to make it flow. Sometimes you'd read back through something. And I don't know if it felt clunky or something like that. So you know, there's a lot of that, and a lot of moving stuff around and then moving it back to where it was in the first place. The one thing I've always done with all my books is let the band read it, you know, and with the other books, all the bands read all their chapters. The last thing I want is a book coming out and then, you know, someone in the band being dismayed, you know, something read in black and white, something that was said in conversation, you suddenly see it on the page in black and white and it feels totally different. So there was a lot of to-in and fro-in, and the Dick and the band were very involved in the, you know, in the proofing and the edit of it, which is exactly, you know, I want it to be. It's nothing worse than sending it off and it just vanishes into a vacuum, and you think, well, they must be happy with it, or perhaps they hate it. Then when it comes out, they all start threatening lawsuits or something, which has happened with previous books. So
really,
yeah. So this was yeah, it was a very much a collaborative effort, really. It feels like I wrote the book with the band rather than about the band.
right. And I think it's really interesting when I've kind of, you know, I've been writing about school bus and the traveller scene recently, and I put a call out on Facebook for people who remember it, and a few comments on Facebook saying, "Why do you want to know about this stuff? What you know, what are you going to get out of it? Are you going to be making money out of it?" And it is that kind of ethical kind of making sure, like you say, the rest of the band and Dick and the band have actually had their say, and about giving it back to them and saying, look, are you okay with this? Before, I suppose it's that notion of being an author, isn't it? You know, you've got responsibilities there.
Yeah, there's there's also the practical side of it, in case I've spelt someone's name wrong or got something wrong, or I transcribed it wrong as well. But you know, when you're trying to convey, you know, a story or a, you know, a feeling, you know, you want to get it right, really. So I have had people ask in the past, you know, what are your motives? You know, and some people were quite distrusting of me. It took a while to win them over. Mick Crudge from the Fits, who unfortunately has passed away now, but when I reached out to him for Burning Britain, he categorically told me he would never do an interview for my book, and I really had to work on him, you know.
Right.
And then when we did finally do the interview, he was like, oh, I honestly thought it was going to be totally different. I don't quite know what he thought I was going to try and do, but I guess he's been dealt so many bad hands in the past by interviewers, or being misquoted in the press, I don't know, or whatnot. But yeah, it's not about that. It's about letting the bands tell their story in their words, really, and I just sort of channel it.
Yeah. There's a good question here from Russ that said, you know, did you work with an editor and or kind of a production manager at the publisher to take you through the stages of writing and publishing?
No. No. Yeah, I've never really trusted anyone else to do it. I mean, I let some friends who can read proof it for me, but apart from that, you know, I think Cherry Red offered me, you know, should we get a professional proofreader on it? And I was like, no, it's, you know, I don't want them. You know, I've got a vision for it, and I don't want them sort of, you know, steering it, really.
That's really interesting, because when we write it in academia, we get that copy editor and we get the proofs coming through, and we get our work changed sometimes to make it fit in a certain kind of academic way, and it's a real shame that it does that.
I mean, it's a difficult one, because you could argue I'm the worst person to proofread my own stuff, but that's why I do give it to other people as well. But like I said, you know, Dick was a very, very thorough proofreader. He was driving me mad with was it colons we had all messed up in the formatting? I can't remember.
Oh,
we changed.
We should have chosen a font where the apostrophe was just a straight line, because like sometimes they're 9s and sometimes they're 6s, and they're all getting the wrong way round, because they had both of them in this font, had the 9s and the 6s types of apostrophes, so just a straight line. Yeah, there's way too many of them. It's a bit embarrassing finding them, really, but it's got to be right, isn't it?
Yeah, we got them all in the end, I think. We've left maybe 1 or 2 in there just.
Yeah, we could offer a prize to the first person to find it or something.
Yeah. A couple more that's going. Jazz, sorry, I'm doing my best to read the chat. I think I'm doing quite good, you know. I reckon I could be a Radio 1 DJ at this point. Is there going to be a joint book launch stroke gig? That's an interesting question.
Well, it's now an idea.
Yes.
I mean, up to that point, the answer was no, but maybe there'll be a yes at some point. I have to work out where to do it, exactly when. The release date of the book is still, we're keeping that mystery for a bit, just in case anything goes wrong. You can't count your chickens and all that. It's an idea, isn't it? But we'd have to do it in several, more than just like one town. And then it becomes a book release tour.
Yeah.
And then we got a few gigs towards the end of March. Only a few. We could call that a book tour and just take some books with us, which is what we're going to do anyway, right? But yeah, slap a name on it.
That's that. Yeah, go on.
Who? Anyone?
This is I like this. This is quite a good one as well from Tim. Ian, what role do you think archiving punk history has in feeding, allowing, or supporting its future? So you know, what's the role of punk archiving?
I knew Tim was going to ask an awkward question. I said that at the beginning, didn't I?
Typical Tim. Yeah.
No, I mean, I must admit there's a selfish side to writing books, in that if you like reading books, you sort of dream of having your own book on your bookshelf, and then once you've got one on there, you dream of it having a whole shelf, you know. But I mean, primarily the reason I wrote Burning Britain was I was writing for Record Collector, and I kept getting sent books to review about the Clash and the Pistols and the Clash and the Pistols and the Clash and the Pistols. And I thought someone has to write a book about Discharge and Crass and stuff like that. And that actually felt like, you know, an important thing for me to do, really, was to capture that sort of second wave or third wave, you know, however you know, stack your waves up, punk scene, and do it properly. But essentially I was writing the book that I wanted to read, really, because that was my entry point to punk. But from there it did grow legs, and I actually thought then it's important that I put in lots of the obscure bands that, if they're not immortalized in print, may, you know, unfortunately vanish into obscurity, you know, and they might have only done, you know, a couple of tracks on a Bullshit Detector or something like that, but, you know, their story was just as valid as, you know, the big names, and they were all part of this fabric that made up the scene, really. But some of this is with the benefit of hindsight as well, and it's probably a bit revisionist what I'm saying, but, you know, there was definitely some of those thought processes going on. It did feel like, you know, it does feel like certainly some of the bands have reached out to me and said, you know, we were so glad to get in your book. We thought no one cared about us anymore, or we'd been forgotten, you know, and some of them even reform again.
Right.
You know, because they start talking to each other when we're doing the book, and suddenly realize, you know, that they enjoyed doing that together and they'd like to do it again. Some people probably won't thank me for some of the bands that reformed off the back of some of the books, but, you know, that's what happened. But I don't know if I've answered Tim's question, but I've tried to.
I think
Thanks, Tim. I'm getting the thumbs up. That'll do.
I've got an interesting one from Dan. Ian, in the intro to The Scene That Would Not Die, you say that's the last of the series. Is that definite? What a question.
Yeah, well, I did say that. I think I mentioned to you, didn't I, that at the end of the book, you're like, I'm never doing this again, because you really go to the well so many times, and it's like, and then as soon as you get the book and put it on your shelf, and you suddenly start to, getting this sort of itch again to do it. So I might do a revenge of The Scene That Would Not Die, but there's 111 bands in that book, and as soon as I finished it, I drew up a list of another 111 bands that could have went in the first one. So I could do another one, and I'm also so that would be a continuation of the series. So I probably meant it when I wrote it, but never say never.
I know you could kind of, we're the same. We're kind of think, oh my God, I'm not going to do that again. And in the same sentence, you're thinking at the same time, right, when's the next one going to come out? Sorry, I've lost this. Callum said it, moving on from that, has said that, the experience of thinking of doing another book. Have you thought about doing another book about a single band? Or as work, for instance, as working with Dick and the rest of the band inspired or put you off for life?
Do you know what? I think it's probably spoiled it for me in a way, because having that massive, because not only did Dick keep diaries, but I think Bruce and Phil to a lesser extent also kept diaries. There was literally just so much information, and material to draw on. And when I think to some of the other bands, who've got literally nothing, they can't remember half of it either, which it would make it really difficult. So if I could find a band that I love their music, with a real passion, and and they were all hopefully still alive, and they'd all kept some records, and there were flyers and photos and stuff, and I thought I could really do justice to it again. But off the top of my head, I can't honestly think of another band really that would fit the bill really. So this might be a one-off as far as single bands.
If it's okay with you, we'll have one last question. I think the questions are kind of dried up. Jazz has said, will the last gig in Warminster from '85 that was videoed ever get released? Dick, do you think it will?
I read that, and probably not. I'm not sure who filmed it, where the film ended up. I remember seeing bits of it, but not the whole gig. I mean, the whole recording was a blurred tape, number 63, for the longest time. A pretty good recording, but the actual existence of the video is still in question. It'd be a good idea to put it out in a sort of DIY, sell them one at a time sort of thing on DVD, if we get it transferred from DVD, if we can find it. Okay, so it's like where to look for it, then finding it, then transferring it, then editing it, then releasing it. So don't hold your breath.
Okay, is that all right, Jazz? Does that open your... Oh, wasn't it Jasper who said? Fingers crossed.
Yeah. Oh, and there was another question. Did the Subhumans ever clash with Crass?
Yeah.
No, we didn't. In fact, we didn't even play with them or meet them. We had no disagreement with them on any level whatsoever. There was no infighting or anything like that. I didn't meet Steve Ignorant until he was in the Stratford Mercenaries many years later. And I mean, there might have been a supposition that all the anarcho-punk bands must know each other and live each other's back pockets, but that was not really the case. Well, it wasn't for us, as we were down in sort of the wilds of West Wiltshire, surrounded by not much, and a lot of other bands were based in, say, London or Manchester or Leeds or whatever. So that idea of there being a massive cooperation between all of us in this whole scene thing was just wishful thinking, really, for the most part. But yeah, we never met Crass for ages, and then met a couple of the individuals in Crass much later on. But there was never any ambivalence. We were both on the same side of the coin, so to speak.
Is it true that you've never? I think you told me this. I could get this wrong. That you've never met Penny. You've never met.
Only briefly for like 15 seconds at a gig once in London. I've met him in a sort of technological, digital way via a few emails over the last recent years on different subjects, and he seems a very polite, kind, thoughtful, intelligent person.
Yeah, a little bit like yourself.
Maybe.
Yeah.
That's not for me to say.
Well, it's for me to say. I think everyone here would agree that you are very kind. You're very articulate, and you've been a great influence. Without being a fanboy, sorry, because we don't have heroes in punk. You don't have
exactly.
Heroes.
No, punk is the one scene where there shouldn't be any demarcation between the stage and the crowd, between the band and the crowd, between any punk and any other punk. Start off equal, and then differences may emerge, but don't start with one up here and one down here, because that is just defeating the whole point.
Yeah, definitely. So if it's okay with everyone in the room, I'd like to leave it there. Thank you. Before I say thank you to everyone, to specifically Dick and Ian, I'd like to thank everyone in the room for putting stuff in the chat, and I hope I asked all the questions that were asked of me. And I hope that I've done a good service as a kind of a chair. But it's been absolutely fantastic to kind of just meet everyone in this room and hear those questions, and to hear Dick and Ian talk about this book. There's not a definite date of when the book is coming out then?
Not a definite one, no.
Spring.
Call it spring.
Spring. And I think what we look forward to the book launch gig tour that's coming up through this. And would that mean also, Ian, that you do the tour with Dick, and you have the book? I suppose you have the book next to the stage.
I'm already thinking that's probably a good way to get my own band on the gigs as well, you see. So
That's it.
It's a perk of the job, and people would be saying he only wrote the book to get on those gigs.
And is there anything wrong with that? Is there?
No, it sounds a bloody good idea.
Right, so on that then, I'm going to kind of say goodbye to everyone. Please have a look at the Punk Scholars Network website page that has, this is the link. If you click on this link from 9 o'clock tomorrow to about 7 o'clock at night, there will be something going on. And it's 2:30 tomorrow afternoon. G Voucher is being interviewed by Rebecca Binns, who's again written a book about G. So they will be talking. So that's on at 2:30. And then we have George Mackay, who wrote Senseless Acts of Beauty, who's doing what we call a keynote on Saturday. But all the info is on the Punk Scholars network. So thank you very much. And last but not least, thank you to Ian and thank you to Dick. That's great.
Well, thank you, Mike. Nice one.
Thank you. Thanks for everyone tuning in. Thanks for the questions. Great to meet everyone.
Great stuff. See you all.
Quality.
See you later, guys.
Bye. Bye.